Chapter 6 of The Dragon and the Raven by G.A. Henty. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. The Dragon and the Raven by G.A. Henty. Chapter 6 The Saxon Fort. A strict watch was kept all night, and several scouts were sent out. These, on their return, reported that the Danes were feasting, having slain many cattle and broached the casks of mead which they found in the cellars of Edmund's house. This they had not burned, nor the houses round it, intending, as the scouts supposed, to make it their headquarters while they attacked the fort. Edmund and Egbert agreed that it would be well to show the Danes at once that they had an active and enterprising foe to deal with. They therefore awakened their band, who were sleeping on skins close to the gate, and with them started out. It was still 2 hours before dawn when they approached the house. Save a few men on watch, the great Danish host, which the messengers calculated to amount to 10,000 men, were asleep, cautiously making their way so as to avoid stumbling over the Danes, who lay scattered in groups round the house. The Saxons crept forward quietly until close to the entrance, when a sleepy watchman started up. "Who are ye?" The answer was a blow from Egbert's battle-axe. Then the leaders, with 20 of their men, rushed into the house, while the rest remained on guard at the entrance. The combat was short but furious, and the clashing of arms and shouts of the Danes roused those sleeping near, and the men who escaped from the house spread the alarm. The fighting lasted but 3 or 4 minutes, for the Danes, scattered through the house, and in many cases still stupid from the effects of the previous night's debauch, were unable to gather and make any collective resistance. The two jarls fought in a manner worthy of their renown, but the Saxon spears proved more than a match for their swords, and they died fighting bravely till the last. Between Saxon and Dane there was no thought of quarter. None asked for mercy on either side, for none would be granted. The sea rovers never spared an armed man who fell into their hands, and the Saxons were infuriated by the sufferings which the invaders had inflicted upon them, and had no more pity upon their foes than they had with wild animals. Besides the jarls, some 30 of their minor leaders were in the house, and but 5 or 6 of them escaped. It was well for the Danes that the detachment which lay there was not their principal body, which was still a few miles in the rear, for had it been so, 2 of their kings and 6 jarls, all men of famed valour, would have been slain. The instant the work was done, the Saxons rejoined those assembled at the entrance. Already the Danes were thronging up, but at present in confusion and disorder, coming rather to see what was the matter than to fight, and hardly believing that the Saxons could have had the audacity to attack them. In an instant the Saxons fell into their usual formation, and overturning and cutting down those who happened to be in their path, burst through the straggling Danes, and at a trot proceeded across the country. It was still dark, and it was some time before the Danes became thoroughly aware of what had happened. Then, missing the voices of their leaders, some of them rushed into the house, and the news that the 2 jarls and their companions had been slain roused the Danes to fury. At once they set off in pursuit of the Saxons in a tumultuous throng, but the band had already a considerable start, and had the advantage of knowing every foot of the country, of which the Danes were ignorant. When once fairly through the enemy, Edmund had given the word, and the formation had broken up, so that each man could run freely and without jostling his comrades. Thus they were enabled to proceed at a rapid pace, and reached the fort just as day was breaking, without having been discovered or overtaken by the Danes. The news of this successful exploit raised the spirit of the garrison of the fort. The Danes swarmed nearly up to the walls, but seeing how formidable was the position, and being without leaders, they fell back without making an attack, some of the more impetuous having fallen from the arrows of the bowmen. About midday a solid mass of the enemy were seen approaching, and the banners with the black raven on a blood-red field showed that it contained leaders of importance, and was in fact the main body of the Danes. It was an imposing sight as it marched towards the fort, with the fluttering banners, the sun shining upon the brass helmets and shields of the chiefs, and the spearheads and swords of the footmen. Here and there parties of horsemen galloped about the plain. "Their number has not been exaggerated," Egbert said to Edmund. "There must be 10,000 of them. They are fully twice as many as attacked us on the field of Kesteven." The sight of the great array struck terror into the minds of a great part of the defenders of the fort, but The confident bearing of their young ealdorman and the thought of the strength of their walls reassured them. The Danes halted at a distance of about a quarter of a mile from the walls, and 3 or 4 of their chiefs rode forward. These, by the splendour of their helmets, shields, and trappings, were clearly men of great importance. They halted just out of bowshot distance, and one of them, raising his voice, shouted, "Dogs of Saxons, have ye laid down your arms and made submission to me, I would have spared you. But for the deed which you did last night, and the slaying of my brave jarls, I swear that I will have revenge upon you, and by the god Woden, I vow that not one within your walls, man, woman, or child, shall be spared. This is the oath of King Uffa." "It were well, King Uffa," Edmund shouted back, "to take no rash oaths. Before you talk of slaying you have got to capture, and you will need all the aid of your false gods before you take this fort. As to mercy, we should as soon ask it of wolves. We have God and our good swords to protect us, and we fear not your host, were it 3 times as strong as it is." The Saxons raised a great shout, and the Danish king rode back to his troops. The lesson which had been given them of the enterprise of the Saxons was not lost, for the Danes at once began to form a camp, raising an earthen bank which they crowned with stakes and bushes as a defence against sudden attacks. This work occupied them for 2 days, and during this time no blow was struck on either side, as the Danes posted a strong body of men each night to prevent the Saxons from sallying out. On the 3rd day the work was finished, and the Danish kings with their jarls made a circuit round the walls, evidently to select the place for attack. The time had passed quietly in the fort. In one corner the priests had erected an altar, and here mass was said 3 times a day. The priests went among the soldiers, exhorting them to resist to the last, confessing them and giving them absolution. The pains which the Danes had taken in the preparation of their camp was a proof of their determination to capture the fort, however long the operation might be. It showed, too, that they recognized the difficulty of the task, for had they believed that the capture could be easily effected, they would at once upon their arrival have advanced to the attack. "Tomorrow morning early," Egbert said, "I expect that they will assault us. In the first place, probably they will endeavour to carry the fort by a general attack. If they fail in this, they will set to construct engines with which to batter the wall." At daybreak the following morning the Danes issued from their camp. Having formed up in regular order, they advanced towards the castle. They divided into 4 bands. 3 of these wheeled round to opposite sides of the fort. The 4th, which was as large as the other 3 together, advanced towards the entrance. The Saxons all took the posts previously assigned to them on the walls. Edmund strengthened the force on the side where the gate was by posting there in addition the whole of his band. Although there were nearly 350 fighting men within the walls, of whom the greater part had fought against the Danes in the battles of the previous year. The attack commenced simultaneously on all sides by a discharge of arrows by the archers of both parties. The Saxons, sheltered behind the parapet on the walls, suffered but slightly, but their missiles did considerable execution among the masses of the Danes. These, however, did not pause to continue the conflict at a distance, but uttering their battle cry, rushed forward. Edmund and Egbert had but little fear of the attack on the other faces of the fort proving successful. The chief assault was against the gate, and it was here that the real danger existed. The main body of the Danes covered themselves with their shields and rushed forward with the greatest determination, pouring through the gap in the outer bank in a solid mass, and then turning along the fosse towards the inner gate. Closely packed together, with their shields above their heads, forming a sort of testudo or roof which protected them against the Saxons' arrows, they pressed forward in spite of the shower of missiles with which the Saxons on the walls assailed them. Arrows, darts, and great stones were showered down upon them, the latter breaking down the shields and affording the archers an opportunity of pouring in their arrows. Numbers fell, but the column swept along until it gained the gate. Here those in front began an attack upon the massive beams with their axes, and when they had somewhat weakened it, battered it with heavy beams of timber until it was completely splintered. While this was going on, the Saxons had continued to shoot without intermission, and the Danish dead were heaped thickly around the gate. The Danish archers, assisted by their comrades, had scrambled up onto the outer bank and kept up a heavy fire on the defenders of the wall. The Saxons sheltered their heads and shoulders, which were above the parapet, with their shields, and between these as through loopholes their archers shot at the Danes.